The uncomfortable truth is that nothing in your life is actually blocking you except the moment you hesitate. Not your past, not your situation, not your resources. It is the split second where you feel the push to act and you choose to step back instead of forward. That moment looks small, almost invisible, but it is the exact place where entire futures are decided. And if you keep repeating that moment, it starts to build something stronger than motivation. It builds identity. Because identity is not what you say about yourself, it is what you repeatedly allow yourself to do. Every delay teaches your mind that hesitation is normal. Every excuse teaches your brain that comfort is safety. Every unfinished plan becomes evidence that your potential is optional, not necessary. But here is what most people never realize. Your mind is always watching your actions more than your intentions. It does not believe your words. It believes your behavior. So even when you say you want change, if your actions stay the same, your mind quietly adjusts its expectations. It lowers your standards without asking for permission. And over time, you stop expecting more from yourself, not because you cannot do more, but because you have trained yourself not to. That is how life becomes smaller without you noticing. Not through failure, but through repetition without direction. You don't collapse suddenly, you shrink slowly. One skipped effort at a time, one postponed decision at a time, one ignored opportunity at a time. And the most dangerous part is how normal it starts to feel. What once felt like potential begins to feel like just how I am. But that is not truth. That is conditioning. And anything that is learned can be unlearned. Anything that is conditioned can be reconditioned. But only if you interrupt it before it becomes permanent. Right now, there are two forces pulling you in opposite directions. One is comfort. It tells you to wait, to prepare more, to think a little longer before acting. The other is truth. It is quieter, but stronger. It tells you that nothing changes until you move, even if you are not ready. And the tension you feel between these two forces is not confusion. It is the exact moment where your life can shift direction. But most people lose this moment because they try to feel ready first. They wait for certainty before action. They wait for confidence before effort. They wait for proof before belief. And in that waiting, they slowly lose the only thing that could have changed everything: momentum. Because momentum does not come from clarity, it comes from movement. Even imperfect movement, even uncomfortable movement, especially that. The truth is, you are not as far from change as you think. You are only one consistent decision away from starting a different pattern. But that decision will never feel perfect. It will always feel slightly too early, slightly too uncertain, slightly too uncomfortable. And that is exactly why it matters. Because if it felt easy, everyone would already be doing it. This is where everything becomes real. Not in thought, but in action. Not in planning, but in execution. Because the life you are imagining does not require a different world. It requires a different response to the same world, a different reaction to the same problems, a different choice in the same moment of hesitation. And once you see that clearly, something inside you becomes harder to ignore. You realize that you have not been waiting for life to change. You have been waiting for yourself to act like someone who changes it. And that realization changes everything, because now there is nowhere left to hide inside excuses. You can no longer call it confusion when it is actually hesitation. You can no longer call it timing when it is actually avoidance. You can no longer call it preparation when it is actually delay dressed up as logic. The mind is clever like that. It protects comfort by giving it reasonable names. But truth does not need better language. It only needs honesty. And honesty is heavy. Because once you see how much of your life has been shaped by small delays, you start to understand something deeper. You are not far from your goals because they are impossible. You are far because your actions are inconsistent. That is it. Not talent, not luck, not circumstances, consistency, or the lack of it. And that truth is uncomfortable because it removes every external thing to blame. But it also gives you power back. Because if inconsistency created your current life, consistency can rebuild it. Not instantly, not dramatically, but undeniably. The same way your habits quietly built your current reality, they can quietly rebuild a new one. The difference is direction. The only thing that changes everything is whether your repetition is aligned with your future or your distraction. And this is where most people break, not because they are incapable, but because they underestimate how powerful small actions are over time. They wait for big transformation moments, but life is never built in moments. It is built in patterns. And patterns are built in ordinary days. Days that feel too small to matter until they accumulate into a life that feels too large to escape. So when you say you will change someday, you are not rejecting action. You are just choosing repetition of your current self a little longer. And that choice, repeated enough times, becomes identity. Not because you wanted it, but because you allowed it. But there is something you must understand clearly now. The version of you that you admire, the one you imagine when you think about your potential, is not built in imagination. That version is built in resistance, in showing up when it is uncomfortable, in continuing when nothing feels rewarding yet, in doing what you said you would do, even when nobody is watching. That version is not waiting for motivation. That version is built through discipline that feels unimportant in the moment, but powerful in hindsight. And the longer you delay that discipline, the more distance you create between who you are and who you know you could become. Not a dramatic distance, a quiet one, the kind that doesn't scream, but slowly becomes reality. This is why urgency matters, not as panic, but as awareness. Because time does not pause for intention, it only records action. And every day you postpone change, you are not staying still. You are reinforcing a direction that feels familiar but not fulfilling. And here is the hardest truth to accept. Nobody is coming to rescue your potential. No perfect opportunity is being prepared for you. No future moment is guaranteed to feel easier than this one. Every version of your life that feels better than this will require you to move through the same resistance you feel right now. So the question is never whether you can change. The question is whether you will interrupt the pattern while you still feel it, or wait until it becomes your identity. Because once something becomes identity, it stops feeling like a choice. It starts feeling like personality. But right now, it is still a choice. Still flexible, still reversible, still in your hands in a way it may not always be. And that is where the pressure becomes clarity. Not to overwhelm you, but to wake you up to what is still available. Because the truth is, you are not late to your life. You are standing in the exact moment where it can still change direction. But only if you stop negotiating with the part of you that always asks for more time. And now you see it clearly. There is no hidden barrier left to discover. No new explanation waiting to save you from responsibility. No external force quietly controlling your direction. Just you, standing at the center of every decision you have repeated long enough for it to become your life. That realization is not comforting. It is sharp. Because it removes the illusion that you are waiting for change instead of creating it. And once that illusion breaks, you cannot unsee how much power you have been handing away in small moments that felt harmless at the time. Every day you wake up, you are not starting from zero. You are starting from what you allowed yesterday to continue. That is why progress feels slow when your actions are inconsistent. Not because life is unfair, but because inconsistency keeps resetting your momentum before it can compound. And without compounding, nothing grows. Not confidence, not discipline, not identity. But when consistency enters, even in the smallest form, something powerful begins to happen. Your mind stops debating with you as much. Your resistance weakens. Not because the struggle disappears, but because repetition starts to train certainty. You begin to trust your own behavior again. And that trust becomes the foundation of everything you thought you were missing. Most people never reach that stage because they confuse intensity with transformation. They think change must feel powerful, emotional, dramatic. But real change is quieter. It looks almost ordinary in the beginning. One decision repeated when it would have been easier not to. One moment of discomfort accepted instead of avoided. One action taken without needing perfect conditions. And because it feels small, people dismiss it. They underestimate it. They wait for something bigger. But life does not respond to intensity alone. It responds to repetition. And repetition does not ask for attention. It just builds. This is why your current moment matters more than it feels like it does. Because nothing about your future will change until something about your behavior changes first. Not everything, just something. A shift small enough to start, but consistent enough to matter. That is how direction changes. Not with a leap, but with a refusal to stay exactly the same. And here is what becomes unavoidable once you understand this. You are always practicing something. You are either practicing discipline or practicing delay. You are either practicing follow-through or practicing avoidance. There is no neutral state. Every repeated action is shaping a version of you that will eventually feel normal. So the question is not whether you are becoming someone. You already are. The question is whether you are paying attention to what you are becoming. Because one path feels comfortable now, but costly later. The other path feels uncomfortable now, but freeing later. And the human mind is always tempted by immediate relief, even when it leads to long-term limitation. That is why most people stay stuck, not because they lack knowledge, but because they keep choosing short-term comfort over long-term direction. But you are not meant to stay there. You are not meant to keep circling the same patterns while watching time move forward without you. There is a version of you that exists beyond hesitation, beyond negotiation, beyond waiting to feel ready. And that version is not created by thinking differently. It is created by acting differently, repeatedly, until it becomes automatic. And that is the real turning point, not when you understand it, but when you stop treating it like something you will start later. Because later is where most lives quietly lose direction. Not through failure, but through endless postponement of the moment that could have changed everything. So right now, everything becomes simple again. Not easy, but simple. You either continue the pattern you already know will not take you where you want to go, or you interrupt it while you still can feel it happening. That interruption is where your future begins to separate from your past. And now the truth becomes heavier because there is no more space left for confusion. You are not waiting for clarity anymore. You are not searching for answers anymore. You already have enough awareness to change direction. What remains is not knowledge, but action. And action is where most people hesitate because action removes the safety of imagination and replaces it with reality. Reality does not care how long you have been thinking about change. It only responds to what you do next. And that is why this moment feels different. Not because something outside has changed, but because something inside can no longer pretend it does not know the truth. You can feel it now. That quiet pressure under every excuse you used to rely on. It is not motivation. It is awareness refusing to disappear. And awareness becomes uncomfortable when it is ignored for too long. It starts to press against your thoughts. It shows up when you are silent. It follows you, even when you try to distract yourself. Because deep down, you already understand what needs to happen. You are just measuring how much discomfort you are willing to avoid before you finally face it. But here is what that avoidance costs you. Every time you choose delay over action, you are not just losing time. You are training yourself to trust hesitation more than commitment. You are building a version of yourself that reacts instead of leads. And the longer that continues, the more natural it feels to stay exactly where you are, even when you do not want to. That is the silent trap, not failure, familiarity. Because the mind will always choose what feels known, even when it is limiting. It will keep you in patterns that feel safe, even if they are slowly shrinking your potential. And if you do not interrupt that cycle, it does not stop on its own. It deepens, it strengthens, it becomes automatic. But automatic patterns can be rewritten, not with big promises, not with emotional moments that fade after a few hours. They are rewritten through repetition that refuses to stop, through decisions that feel small, but are made consistently enough to override old conditioning. That is how identity shifts. Not by wishing for change, but by acting in a way that no longer supports the old version of you. And this is where the pressure becomes clarity again. Because now you see, it is not about finding a perfect version of yourself before you begin. It is about beginning while you are still imperfect, still uncertain, still uncomfortable. That is the point where everything meaningful starts. Not when doubt disappears, but when doubt is no longer allowed to decide for you. You have already spent enough time proving what delay can do. You have already seen how easily days can pass without direction, how quickly weeks can disappear without progress, how silently years can move when nothing changes in the pattern. That is no longer unknown to you. It is familiar. And familiarity is what keeps people stuck, not lack of ability. But you are not locked into familiarity unless you keep choosing it. That is the part most people miss. They think change requires a new life. It does not. It requires a new response to the same life. The same moments will still come. The same distractions will still appear. The same resistance will still show up. The difference is whether you obey it or override it. And the moment you start overriding it, even once, something shifts. Because your mind begins to learn a new possibility. It learns that hesitation is not final, that discomfort does not need to be obeyed, that action can happen even without permission from fear. And once that learning begins, it cannot stay the same. So this is where everything tightens, not into pressure, but into responsibility. Because at this point, you cannot unknow what you know. You cannot return to the version of you that believed change was distant or complicated. You are already standing inside awareness, and awareness demands response. And the only thing left is whether you continue repeating what you already know will not lead anywhere new, or whether you finally interrupt it while it is still within your control to change.